what is a special assessment and how does it impact buying and selling? So I guess like special assessments, let's talk about it in two ways. One is in a low-rise building, because we do run into those pretty frequently, but I feel like we handle those differently than a high-rise.
Sure.
And being more in a downtown market.
So special assessments, in my opinion, is a very taboo topic, right? I think a lot of people are very fearful of it, partly because it's scary, but partly because of a lack of understanding. We talk about it all the time. You know, in our opinion, special assessments, as long as they're planned and accounted for, they're typically taking care of the building. They're improving the building. But when they're not planned, or more of a, whoops, we didn't do things right, that's when they get really problematic. So it's something that obviously this is going to be related to condos. A special assessment on its most basic level is when a condo building needs to implement a secondary payment outside of the monthly reserves to do a specific project or to replenish reserves after a specific project. We typically see it more often with bigger stuff. Now, once again, the size of the condo has a lot to do with it. Our smaller buildings, right? Our smaller, more intimate buildings are, I don't know, your 3 units, 6 units, 8 units, 20 units, kind of smaller buildings. These are buildings in general that tend to run a little bit leaner, as we say, right? They've got nice, small monthly assessments, $150 to $350 on average. They tend to budget for what they actually need to pay for as they go through.
Like their operation.
Totally. But they don't do too much in terms of really saying like, hey, we need a new roof, we need to seal a building, we need masonry work, or they might have some put aside for it, but those are bigger projects. And so when those bigger projects come along, the really, really good buildings are the ones that are planning, saying, hey guys, in the next 3 years, we're gonna have to do this. Let's start putting $100 away a month or something like that. But most of them have to have a secondary payment. Now, I usually relate those smaller buildings, and not all of them, but most of them, to almost the idea of owning a single family home, right? If you own a single family home and you need to put a new roof on, well, then you're going to pay for a new roof from that perspective, and then you have a more valuable building at the end. But once again, it's that, do we know about it? Are we aware of it? Are we planning for it? Or is all of a sudden, hey guys, we got a really big rainstorm and we were just told that we need a new roof, and now we're into damage control? Versus, it's a little bit different when we look at some of the bigger buildings, like in downtown.
Well, the bigger buildings downtown, I think, just do it differently, because you do have a little bit of a higher assessment, and so you're expecting, and you have a property manager, right? So you're expecting them to be planning for all of this stuff.
Right.
Whereas a smaller building, you're right, they run leaner, so we know just instinctively that when things come up, you're going to have to pay for that.
Yeah.
And you typically split it with all the other people. It's the big shockers of downtown where you're like
paying $1,000 a month.
Yeah, but I think like in the smaller buildings, your special assessments aren't as large, right? So like a roof is going to cost you 10 grand. All right, well, if you divide that by 3, that's like $3,000. In a bigger building, they're not going to just charge you a $3,000 special assessment. That doesn't make sense, right? So they always charge, they're going to wait for a bigger project and then overdo it so that
they can replenish some of
the reserves. They have all that, like all just the stuff ready for it. And so that's where you start seeing the
$30,000 new windows,
$50,000. And that is, for a lot of people, almost like a second mortgage. And so that's where the hard part with the fear comes in.
Yeah.
Because we've had those happen before.
So then, taking this to the next point, how does this impact our clients that are buying and selling? Let's kind of first take from our seller's perspective and say, if the building that they are selling in has a special assessment in it, what do we need to do? What do we need to be thinking about from that perspective?
Strategy is always key. The unknown is sometimes the really hard part. So we've literally had, well, I had 2 listings within the last year that had special assessments that were coming up, but we don't know the extent of it. We don't know everything like that. So that's the hard part. But the best part about that, and the best part about that strategy, is you just let the buyer know what they are expecting, and they take on the risk a little bit more. I find that's always a little bit easier.
Sure.
Because you can kind of like pitch it like, hey, you're the one who's going to benefit from it.
Playing devil's advocate,
on the buy side,
but it's also hard to get those buyers confident to say, hey, there's something coming up. We don't know where it is. So sometimes it takes us
a little bit
putting
more
some money aside for a period of time and navigating that.
Yeah, and we can always do like an escrow and say, hey, like we'll set aside, you know, $5,000 out of our proceeds for the next 6 months or the next year.
Well, they determine more on this.
Yeah, and get a little bit more information on it.
Yeah.
But I've found success in that with 2 of our listings, so I'm happy with that. But
what about, so then the other complication that both you and I have run into on this is that sometimes the special assessment can cause issues with the financing on our listings, right? The lenders don't like special assessments.
Well, it depends on what the special assessment is for,
yes.
Right? So like a lot of it is right now what we're running into, and then that, thank you, Miami, that building that fell down in Miami and killed all those people. Well, who has the biggest pockets, right?
Right.
It's not the homeowners. It's not the association. It's going to be Fannie and Freddie. It's the big lenders. And so those are the people who got sued. And so that naturally is going to shift our... It's tightening up our items. And unfortunately, that does have an effect.
Yeah.
So it really just depends on like what they're doing. So we do have to kind of talk about it.
But I would say what I've noticed, and I don't know if you've seen differently, is that, so it used to be, right? We go back 5-10 years. If there was a special assessment in the building, the lenders were all like, no, we don't want to lend in there. There's too much risk, red tape, all of that. Now I feel like most often we can navigate it. Most often they can get the information that they need to navigate. And sometimes it's how questionnaires are answered and how the association is going to do things. So it takes a lot of strategy, as you said, and a lot of delicate finesse to navigate those waters on both the buying and the selling side, because the lenders can have some issues if it's not presented properly.
Yes.
So,
and the other thing about special assessments is it has to be paid off by most lenders. So you can't, for a buyer, you cannot get financing for it unless it's already
levied.
If it's levied and you're paying the monthly, you can't assume that monthly payment a lot of the time. So
it depends on how it's structured.
Yeah.
And some of that, and that's where it's so, there's so many different complexities of it. Is it a special assessment in discussion?
Yeah.
Is it in a research phase? Has it been levied? Is it actively going? Has the work been done? Has the, anything completed, or is the work still outstanding? And is there a possibility of further growth of the project?
Yeah.
Like, those are all really important questions to come back on. So what about for our buyers? We sell a lot of buyers into condos. How do we make sure that our buyers are in good positions in condo buildings with regards to special assessments?
So unfortunately, we can't always predict what is going on, but we can try the best that we can. So we get all the condo docs. So we get a 22.1 disclosure, which is every single condo in the state of Illinois has to accompany it. That gives us kind of like a full run over, right? So they say 2 years of capital improvements, what have they done in the last 2 years? So we can kind of build a story timeline of what they've done in the past and what they're going to do in the future. Again, it's never... We don't have a crystal ball, so unfortunately I can't always say it, but we can do our due diligence. We can look at the meeting minutes. We can say, based on board meetings, what are they talking about? Are they starting to research things? Are they replacing certain things?
I mean, the one thing that I would say is that I think that we do a lot of investigative work in that, right? So depending on the building is going to depend on how much information they have. We do get the 22.1, as you said. We do get meeting minutes if they exist. We follow up with all sorts of questions on all these things. We review the budgets, we review the rules and regs, we review all these things. And that if we still have question marks when we're done, then we approach the association, right? We get that information. And sometimes, right, especially when you've got an attorney and a seller and everybody else in between, sometimes then we have to say, hey, can we get on the phone with somebody from the association or the management? Can we have a conversation so we can hear from somebody outside of the transaction? What is going on? What is the thought process? How everyone feels about it? Just so that, I always say that sometimes that gives us the most amount of confidence in where things are at, especially with other people in the building that would be in a similar situation to our seller. Now, as you said, sometimes we do all the due diligence in the world, and sometimes we still get sucker punched. I had one last year, which we exhausted all of our due diligence, time and time again, calls, meetings, everything. We got so much information, and then literally 3 weeks after the clients moved in, there was an emergency special assessment that was called for something that had happened somehow, and it was pretty contentious because there were 3 units that turned over this in the 6 months before, and all 3 groups were like, what just happened? So things happen. Owning homes have, whether you buy a single family, a condo, a townhome, whatever it is, things can happen. But I'd like to think that we have a fairly strong record because we are so exhaustive in our efforts to make sure that everybody's in a good position.
We're very exhaustive.
When it exhausting comes to, or exhaustive?
No, exhaustive when it comes to researching. I think sometimes
they don't like us.
Sometimes the other side is just like, what are you guys doing? Can we just close this out? We're like, no, we're just getting information.
Yeah. No, it's I like to think we're pretty likable.
I mean, we're likable, but sometimes we can be a little much.